Hello friends, my name's Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we're taking a look at some American cars. Let's jump straight into it with the first car today, which is a Saleen S7, 575 horsepower, 2,756 pounds of weight. This is the lightest vehicle here today by a relatively decent margin. Anyways, the Saleen S7 is actually very much in contention for the top spot on our leaderboard. It's currently led by a McLaren F1, which is kind of strange when you consider the Saleen S7 does really kind of look like a McLaren F1. But yes, this car could very well be challenging for the top of our leaderboard. On paper, the stats don't look too amazing. 575 horsepower isn't actually all that much, especially considering the F1 had like 60 more than this. However, the thing with the Saleen S7 is somehow, some way, I assume it's because of its very slipstream body, this car is stupid quick. It was one of the fastest cars of the time back in its day, and it's still pretty darn quick today, around 230 mph top speed. The other thing the Saleen S7 has in its favour is the fact that it handles excellently. This is an absolutely outstanding car to drive. The Saleen S7 is often overlooked when it comes to hypercars, and you really shouldn't overlook this car. It is fantastic to drive. If you haven't driven it on Forza 6, which I guess many of you probably haven't, go drive this car right away. You will be blown away with just the amount of grip this thing has. It is insane. So we'll have to see if it can actually challenge the F1. Next up, we have a Chevrolet Corvette C7 Z06, 650 horsepower, 3,536 pounds of weight. Now, the Corvette C7 Z06, you look at this thing on paper and you go, right, that's just your standard super muscle car, it's going to kill me. When you actually drive it, however, all those little carbon fibre aero bits around it do seem to add up to a huge difference, and as a result, this car is, again, it's excellent to drive. Like, this truly is an absolutely excellent car to drive. Anyone who says American cars can't turn, introduce them to the Saleen S7, introduce them to this Corvette. They will be blown away. The Corvette honestly handles better than most Ferraris. It really does. It handles better than most Porsches, handles better than most Lamborghinis. This is a truly astonishingly handling car. It is very good. Straight line speed's pretty good as well. 650 horsepower is quite a lot, but you have got to remember there is a lot of downforce on this thing which will restrict its top speed. But, I mean, for quick dashes between corners as you get on Top Gear, yeah, it's very quick, and through the corners it is something else. The brakes are fantastic, the turning grip is amazing. Everything about this car is fantastic. Like, seriously, go, again, this is another car. If you haven't driven this one, go drive it now, it will surprise you. Next up, we have a Dodge Viper GTS, 640 horsepower, 3,296 pounds of weight. Now, the Viper GTS, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but if you've got people who doubt that American cars can't turn, introduce them to this as well, because the Viper is another very, very good handling vehicle. I will say it is a lot better in the dry than it is in the wet. In the wet, it feels a little bit heavy. The brakes aren't quite as sharp as they are on the C7. Overall, the Viper in general, just handling-wise, isn't as sharp as the Corvette, but it's still very much exceptional to drive. It really is very, very good. Again, this is another car which can embarrass some of those European and German European mainstays. It really can. When it comes to its handling, it's insane. Also helps that the Viper looks absolutely amazing. I adore the Dodge Viper. This is the 2013 model we have here is one of my all-time favourite cars. I love this car, especially in blue and white. I mean, how can you not have a Viper in blue and white? It just looks great in that colour scheme. Yeah, the Viper was exceptionally, well, pretty darn good to drive, actually. Again, if you're going to set lap times, I would probably recommend the Chevrolet Corvette or another car which we'll get into later on in this Top Gear lap series. Not in this episode, but later on in the series we'll take a look at another car which is a great alternative for smashing lap times. Anyways, next up we have the Ford GT. This is the 2005 model, 550 horsepower, 3,390 pounds of weight. Now, the Ford GT, the 2005 version, was very much meant to go up against the Ferrari F430, Pagani's Hondas of its time. In truth, when it comes to actually driving it around the track, it isn't amazing. It's very heavy feeling. This car honestly feels like it weighs about 3,800 pounds. It doesn't feel like a supercar at all to drive. Another thing that it has is not particularly great gear ratios. I got up to about third gear maximum in this car. Now, if we compare it towards the Ford GT40, which is essentially the older version of this car, the sort of predecessor, the GT40 is quicker in a straight line. The 05 GT is a bit better through the corners handling-wise, although when it comes to corner speed, they probably take about the same. This does have a slightly better gearbox than the GT40. The GT40 doesn't get out of second. This will get out of second, it'll go into third. Although, to be honest with you, I could have probably used second the entirety of this lap, and the car probably wouldn't have complained all that much. Yeah, the Ford GT just isn't a particularly amazing car to drive, especially when you consider the cars it was up against at the time. It's just not great. Next up, we have the Cadillac CTS-V Sedan, 640 horsepower, 4,128 pounds of weight. Now, I had high hopes for the CTS-V Sedan. It looks very aggressive, it looks like it should handle pretty darn decently, and well, as we've explored with some of the previous cars, they handle pretty darn well for American cars, and especially the C7, and considering this has the engine from a C7, I believe, you would expect this to handle pretty well. It really doesn't. It slides all over the shop. That's all it really wants to do. The biggest issue with this car, though, by far, is not the sliding, it's the gearbox. Now, unlike in the Ford GT, where, you know, the gears are too long, in this they are ridiculously short. First gear revs out to about 30 miles an hour, second to 60, third goes to about 90. The problem you've got is you're just constantly changing gears. Again, I like a gearbox which is sort of not too long, but not too short. I like the cars to have a decent amount of rev range. I want them to stay in their power bands, which the Ford GT doesn't, because you have to sort of switch gears all the time. Switch gears less often because there isn't, you know, as longer gear ratios. But I also want the car to actually have a bit of room to sort of sit at the red line, and the CTS just doesn't. It just constantly change gear, change gear, change gear, change gear. It's not great. Next up, we have the Dodge Charger Hellcat, 707 horsepower, 4,575 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful vehicle here today by a decent enough margin. It's also the heaviest car here today. Now, I'm sure many of you are probably... You've probably been wanting this for a little while. I mean, the Hellcat in the rain. I mean, yeah, 707 horsepower, rear-wheel drive, muscle car in the wet. How does it handle? It isn't great. Honestly, though, I'm gonna say I think I actually preferred driving this over the CTS-V. I guess it's because this wasn't as sort of a shock to me as the CTS. The CTS was kind of shocking in the sense that I actually thought it would be a pretty decent handling vehicle. The Charger didn't shock me. I kind of knew what I was getting into with this car. The biggest issue the Charger has, though, is it has the worst differential ever fitted to a modern car. It is awful. You turn a corner and it will just start wanting to spin one wheel. I don't know what it is, considering the Challenger doesn't actually have this issue. The Charger has this issue, the Challenger doesn't. It's weird. Either way, as soon as you get to a straight, Charger will blow everything out of the water. This thing is stupid fast. It is probably the fastest vehicle here today in a straight line by a decent margin. Yeah, not the best vehicle to drive, but honestly I probably preferred it to the CTS-V. And finally today we have the Ford Mustang. This is a 2015 model, 421 horsepower, 3,618 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful vehicle here today. Kind of unsurprisingly, really, when you consider all of the insane muscle cars and supercars that we've had go around the track today. The 2015 Mustang, I've done several reviews of this car. I reviewed it in Forza 5, I've also driven it a fair bit in Forza 6, especially recently with the whole league events with the Forza Racing Championship. And I kind of find this car to be a mixture of two halves. It's actually a pretty decent vehicle to drive. It's perfectly fine, it's perfectly acceptable. My biggest issue with the Mustang is usually the fact the brakes feel like they're from the 80s, and so does the suspension. It does rock and roll around a bit on the suspension. Honestly, I don't know if it's just because this was in the wet and I had slightly other things to worry about, but the GT handles pretty well on the wet. It handles a bit better than I was really expecting it to. You don't really notice the whole brake and suspension issues out much when it comes to the wet. I guess that might be because I drove the Charger before I drove this, so maybe I was just remembering the slightly chaotic brakes the Charger has. But no, the Mustang, it isn't a bad car to drive per se, but it still isn't great. I'd probably get a BMW M4 over the Mustang. Not in real life, in the game. In real life, I'd go for the Mustang because I'm not a huge fan of the M4, but there you go. Anyways, across the line with the Mustang and onto the times, and the Saleen S7 goes into first place with a 119.556, beats the McLaren F1 by 0.5 of a second, beats the McLaren 12C by a full second. That Saleen S7 is insane. Speaking of insanity though, by far and away the biggest surprise of today, Chevrolet Corvette C7 Z06, 4th place, 120.686. It almost beat the 12C, and we already know that's a stupidly quick supercar. Viper GTS goes into 5th with 121.435. A little bit behind the Corvette, still amazing though. It beat a Ferrari F40 and a Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera. That's quick. Ford GT05 just beats the GT40 by a tiny little fraction there. Moving down the board, the Charger Hellcat goes into 23rd with 126.701, followed by the CTS-V, which goes into 24th with 126.850. And the slowest car of today was the Ford Mustang from 2015, 127.676 for the Mustang. Does beat a Honda NSXR just and an R32 Skyline by quite a margin, as in almost a second. So that's not a bad time by the 2015 Mustang, certainly, although compared to modern sports cars, it probably wouldn't hold up so well. Anyways, friends, that is it for today's episode of the Forza Top Gear Laps. In the next episode, I do have a theme in line, but I can't remember what it is right now, so I guess we'll find out on Tuesday when that episode will probably go up. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching. As always, if you have any suggestions for themes or cars you'd like to go... if you have any suggestions for cars or themes you'd like to see go around the Top Gear track, then do let me know in the comments below. But yeah, thank you all very much for watching, friends. My name has been The Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.